First thing, I'm going to skip to number 3 because it was raised last week about the dishwasher, because I didn't mention it, right? A dishwasher is really not possible to kosher for Passover, because most dishwashers, the insides of the dishwashers are such that they can't be koshered, and the racks are usually rubber, and that also can't be koshered. If you really want to have one for Pesach, hopefully you have a Pesach kitchen, you can put one in. It's a couple $100. But to actually kosher for Pesach is virtually impossible. It's like, as I said before, trying to kosher your barbecue. You can do it, like literally you could do it, but I don't know anybody who takes the time and effort to do it. It's just like unbelievably difficult. And a dishwasher is not just difficult, you have to like replace the racks. And when you go to replace the racks, you'll find out that they cost the same as a new dishwasher. So it's sort of a waste. So I would say don't do it, and buy the tubs, the Tupperware tubs that you put in a sink. You have ones for milk, one for meat. You pick it yourself, whatever color you want, and just use that for a week. And you just have to wash the dishes, or use styrofoam plates, right? Something like that. So then why don't we begin with number 1? We're going to talk here about what needs hashgacha and what doesn't. What needs to be certified kosher for Passover and what doesn't need it. First thing is, when we say it doesn't need it, it doesn't mean it doesn't need to be kosher. It has to be kosher. But we're going to now ask, does it have to have a special certification that says it's kosher for Passover, right? Or is it just enough to just be kosher normally? An example, coffee. So coffee beans, whole and ground, are kosher for Passover, as long as they're coffee beans. They're not flavored, right? There's nothing added to it. It's regular coffee beans. They are all kosher for Passover. When you get now the instant coffee, it is not all kosher for Passover. And the reason is because of the preservatives. It was the same case for many years with regular coffee, that they made it with preservatives, and the preservatives were actually chametz, and then you couldn't use it. So that's why when you used to go to the store, you would see Maxwell House and Folgers with the OUP, because they would not put that preservative in at that time. But today, they don't use that preservatives in ground coffee and regular coffee, but they still use them in instant coffee because they last longer in most places. So they wanted to continue. So you would not have to get a special beans or ground coffee for Passover, but you do need for instant. And I'm excluding flavored. If you buy any flavored coffees, not only they have to be regularly kosher, they would have to be kosher for Passover. And that's why they're so rare. Yes?
Yeah, so what I did, when I went into No Frills, I went to the regular aisle where they sell coffee, and I looked at the certification. It says kosher P.
Okay.
So I bought it. So that way it was cheaper than buying the kosher coffee.
It is, and you didn't even have to do that. You could just buy kosher. Kosher P meant it's kosher for Passover, right? But all of it is kosher for Passover. That's here. Now, in the U.S., there are some kosher for Passover instant coffees that even without a certification, but here they have to have it. So you can go and you'll find Folgers and others in the regular aisles that will have a P on it, just as it was described, so that you can, when it comes to instant. All right, so this booklet here, as that you're going through, together with just about every other one, now does tell you things that do and do not need certification. It used to be that nobody would do that. Now they all do it, and we have entire lists here of things that do and don't. I'm just going to go through some that might surprise you. Okay, like coffee was one that's changed. That's why I mentioned it. But what other ones that are like that? For instance, frozen fish. Right, fresh fish, of course, is fresh fish. There's no issue with it. But frozen fish has to have special certification for Passover, according to all of the different opinions, because they add things to it in order for it to freeze correctly. And therefore you need to make sure that if you buy frozen fish for any purpose, that it is marked kosher for Passover. Right? That's one that's an example that most people don't catch. I'll just show you here in this book. They have, for instance, like we talked about lactate. We talked about before, right? That the only lactate for people who can't drink regular milk would be lactate milk, not the pills or the drops. Lactate milk you can use on Passover, but you're supposed to buy it before Passover. And I'll explain what that means. For instance, this was the rule for many, many, many years when I was growing up and earlier, that if you wanted to get milk on Passover, they would tell you should buy the milk before Passover begins. And the reason is as follows: in milk and in lactate, they're fortified with vitamins. The case of milk is fortified with vitamin D, and vitamin D is chametz. What it comes from is chametz. And therefore, you can't really drink milk on Passover because it has vitamin D in it. So you buy kosher for Passover milk, which even in the box says vitamin D, it does not have vitamin D. It's by definition wouldn't have it. But what happens if you can't get it? Like when I grew up, you couldn't get kosher for Passover milk except for in the big cities. So how did you do it? Is that we have the law called the law of Batel. The law of Batel is that if you have something inside of a food, a mixture or something, and it's so little that's in it, it's as if it's non-existent. So what is the definition of little? Means that there's less than 1 part in 60. So if you have milk, and inside the milk you've got vitamin D, but the vitamin D, right, when measured, literally the vitamin D before it's put in the milk, when measured, is less than 1/60th of the container of milk that you have. Right, so then it's called batel, which means it doesn't exist. It's so little that it has no effect. However, if something is forbidden, but only for a short period of time, like something that's unkosher is always unkosher, it's always forbidden. So if you would put something unkosher by mistake inside of something kosher, it could be batel because it's something that's always forbidden. But something that's only forbidden for a short time, then the law says it doesn't become batel, it doesn't become non-existent. They just say you have to wait until that time's over and then you can use it. So chametz does not become batel, does not consider non-existence on Pesach. If you buy it before Pesach, then it becomes batel as soon as you bought it, because you now own it, and it's not Pesach yet. As soon as Pesach comes, there is no vitamin D in that milk, right? As if there's none in there. But if you buy it on Pesach, when you bought it, it's already forbidden. So then it is not as if it's non-existent. So that applies with the same way with lactate. So there are a number of things like that if necessary you can buy before Passover, but you shouldn't buy them on Passover. So, and they'll tell you that. Like in this book, it says requires purchase before Passover. Yeah?
Like, for instance, like today I went shopping, I bought frozen strawberries and frozen mangoes, and it was kosher, had the OU on it.
Right.
But it didn't have the P, so it's okay for me to buy
That's
it.
That's right. All frozen fruits that are not sweetened and they have no additions to them, they do not require Passover certification.
They have absorbic acid. Would that
Yeah, I was going to say.
Well, it's like he says here. Fruit frozen, unsweetened, without additives. What are additives? Syrup, citric acid, ascorbic acid, or vitamin C. If it has those, then it needs Passover certification. If it doesn't, then it doesn't need it.
And what about the frozen vegetables?
So it's a similar idea. When it comes to frozen vegetables, because most frozen vegetables are made by conglomerates, by large companies that have all types of things being made there, so frozen vegetables need certification. It's a bit different than the fruit. Okay, let's just go on in our order. So non-food items, we touched on it last time, but non-food items that contain chametz, there's an idea that a person should not benefit from chametz, but the definition of chametz is that it is what we call chametz, and it has to be edible by an animal. If a dog would eat it, then that's considered sufficient that it's still food. If a dog wouldn't eat it, it wouldn't be. An example would be wood alcohol. Wood alcohol is really not chametz, but let's say an example. Let's say shoe polish. If shoe polish can be made with grain alcohol, they can use any type of alcohol in order to to try to cause it to be what it is. If it has grain alcohol, it's chametz. However, a dog wouldn't eat it, right? So therefore you're allowed to use it. Same thing with perfumes, with deodorants, antiperspirants, all of those things. If you ever had the misfortune of tasting them, they taste terrible, and a dog wouldn't eat them. So therefore, you can use antiperspirants and deodorants, right? And the only area of these types of things is if you actually put them in your mouth, if that's the purpose. So if it's a mouthwash, for instance, even if a dog wouldn't eat it because it's so strong, we still would have to have kosher for Pesach because we put it in our mouth. That would apply to lipstick. That would apply to mouthwash and toothpaste. Now, toothpaste, you'll see when you look at the list, most toothpastes are kosher for Pesach without even certification, but you have to look at the right brand. And for the most part, it's ones that are the plain ones, like plain gleam, plain, whatever they are. The plain ones, those are the ones that are right away, but there's entire lists. Now, can you use the one that you were been using? So, and there, it's just a matter of how observant are you with what you're doing. I don't mean observant religious, I mean observant, like are you observant in what you're doing? So if you have no reason to think that your toothpaste, which is kosher for Passover, came into contact with chametz, so then you're allowed to use the same one from before Pesach on Pesach. Your toothbrush, by definition, will have come into contact with chametz, so you'll have to change that, right? Because you use it to brush your teeth after you ate chametz, right, throughout the year. And then that you'd have to get new. But toothpaste itself and shampoos, deodorants, perfumes, all this type of stuff is fine. Powders can be a problem because a lot of powders have cornstarch in them, and cornstarch we're not allowed to use. Right?
And what about, like, I know olive oil? If you buy olive oil before Passover,
you can buy extra virgin olive oil at any time, and it's kosher for Passover. Any other type of olive oil requires to be certified.
If you have Passover items from the year before that have not been opened, that have not been opened up,
you can use them, but I wouldn't eat it.
Huh?
It might not be very good.
Spices and whatnot.
Well, what happens to spices?
As long as you are observant, you know what you're doing.
Yeah,
that you don't leave them in your kitchen, right? And like we have a Pesach kitchen. So anything that's in my Pesach kitchen is it's only in the Pesach kitchen. If I have spices, I can use them from year to year.
But what happens if the spices are opened up?
That's like I said, if you leave them in a place where you know nothing is in contact with it, you can use it. But if you don't know, then you have to get others. Yeah.
The extra virgin olive oil, is that because you're not supposed to have adulteration, or is that?
I'm not sure. What makes it extra virgin rather than virgin? Like, I don't know what the process is.
First pressing, I think it's the first pressing of the olives versus the second pressing. So the first pressing is the most
So I'm not sure why that would make a difference, unless they use something in order to bring out more oil.
Because I know my daughter has some issues. I looked online, and most olive oil isn't really olive oil. Like somebody waved olive oil over something else and put it in because olive oil is more expensive. So, I mean, if it's only extra virgin, and they think because it's the first pressing that's going to be the olive oil. There are actually lists online of virgin olive oil that really it's astounding. And at Costco, where they had 3 kinds of virgin olive oil, online they said only one of them was really olive oil anyhow.
Really? Well, then that's something that should be taken into account.
Let's say the spices were open from last year, you can still use it. They were open.
If you had them somewhere where you know that they have not come near chametz.
Right.
Okay, you've got to know that.
They're in a garbage bag in the back of your basement storage area, nowhere near any other food where mine is. I'm pretty confident that no chametz has gotten into it.
Okay.
As an example.
Okay, let's go on with a few things. So, then, as we were saying, with non-food items, the definition really is if a dog would eat it. That's really what we boil down to. So you can use your shoe polishes, you can use your deodorants and so forth. There are many brands that you can buy where it is certified kosher. They have deodorants that are certified kosher for Passover. They have all of these because people have an understanding you're not allowed to benefit from chametz Right? That's the rule. But the definition of what is the chametz you can't benefit from is something that would be edible by an animal. So if you think it's not just that anything that's made from chametz, but if it's also not edible, then you could use it. You can't eat it, but you could use it. And that would be like an example like shoe polishes and deodorants and so forth. And that's why you'll find that they say this. Now, some people have, when we get to food, there are some people who have customs that will circumvent some of the things we're talking about. I'm going to presume that we don't, but just as an example is eggs. Eggs do not have to be certified kosher for Passover. Eggs are kosher for Passover. However, there are many people who have a custom that they wash their eggs for Passover because their presumption is that it gets chicken feed on them, right, and there's stuff on them. Today, I don't think you're ever going to find that anymore, but it probably was the case at one time, and it probably was the case even when I was a kid. We used to go to the farmer's market and buy eggs. That probably did have things on it, but when you go into the supermarket, it's not the case anymore, so you don't have to do that. But if it's your custom, right, then you can. It's the same thing with some people had customs that they didn't eat garlic. Others had customs not to eat dairy. Right? Like among many Lithuanians, they didn't eat dairy at all. I'm not sure why they had that custom, but they did. But it's not the law, so you're allowed to do it. Where we mentioned before about some of the other customs that to keep in mind, some of them it's not my place to say which customs are good and which are not good. They're customs. The customs of the Jews come from a good reason. But some of them are ones that you really, if you don't have them, you don't want to keep them. You don't want to start them. Like, probably the most common one is called gebrachs. Gebrachs is a Yiddish word which means that they dunk, to put something in. And that what it really means is that a person who follows the rules of non-gebrachs means that they will not allow matzah or any derivative of matzah to come into contact with liquid on Pesach, which means no matzah balls, which means no matzah brei. It means eating your matzah a distance away from soup so it doesn't fall in. It means not anything, not putting matzah in coffee. Any of those types of things that you might be accustomed to do means that you were not raised with that custom. About probably over 30% of observant Jews have that custom today. That's a large number.
That's not Aish. What's that other?
I don't know, but it's not ours.
No, I know.
There's something with mixing eggs and matzah milk. They're making like a fried matzah.
Yeah.
Somewhere I heard that something that you're not supposed to do because is that part of the brach?
You hear that from your daughter? Yes? Your daughter keeps gebrach. She follows that rule.
Okay.
I know she does.
I think it's the buffet.
It's Ashkenazi Jews kind of like all over the place.
So, if you don't have it, don't do it. Please. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it, but if it's not your custom, don't believe that you're more religious if you keep it. You're not. It's just a custom, right? That's one of them. That's important to keep in mind. Like some of these other ones that I mentioned. Like when I told you that there are a certain number of Jews from Lithuania who didn't have dairy on Passover. I know that to be the case. I've met people like that. I've read about it. But there's no reason to do it. There's no reason for you to follow that. It doesn't make you any more religious. So you don't have to. Now, the area of shmura matzah, so the shmura matzah is different than regular matzah. And the difference is they're both kosher for Passover, 100%. There's shmura matzah means guarded. And the point is that if you look in the Torah, it says that you should eat matzahs that guarded, and what does it mean? It means it's guarded from liquid. You don't put any, when you have the flour, you don't touch the flour to liquid because it'll become chametz. So the regular matzah, they say from the time it becomes flour till the time that you've got the matzah, it has not come into contact with liquid. That's called kosher matzah. That's basically what it is. Shmura matzah means that from the time it was harvested, the wheat was harvested, until it's matzah, they guarded it that it should not come into contact with any liquid. And that's, of course, that kind of matzah is found in two forms. It's found in machine matzah, which looks just like the other ones, and handmade matzah, which are the big round ones. So there are some people who have a custom that they only eat shmura matzah on all the Passover. That's not such a difficult thing to do, except that if you do that, that means that you would not eat any store products that have matzah meal in it, because they will not make it with shmura matzah. It's much more expensive. So if you buy any Manischewitz, you buy any cakes in a box that you make, cake mixes, those are all made without shmura matzah. So if one is going to follow this, right, you're going to impede your ability to use those things. Do you have to? There's a basis for it. There's a larger basis for this than some of the other customs, but it's not a necessity. Where it is important to use shmura matzah would be at your Seder. When you actually have the matzah that's a part of the mitzvah of matzah, there it's important to try to use shmura matzah. And our custom is to use the hand shmura matzah. There's actually a very interesting argument in Jewish law, which is better. Traditionally, hand shmura matzah was considered the best you could get. But they found out in the age of industry that machine matzah, that is shmura matzah, actually has a much less chance of becoming chametz, because the machine can make 100 sheets of matzah in a minute, and a human being can make a sheet of matzah in about a minute and a half. Right? So they are about 250 times faster. So there's much less chance that it becomes chametz. But the tradition has been to use the hand ones for most people. And therefore you'll find it, that most places you go will use that at the Seder. And they might use it other times, but people will usually be strict at the Seder, and we should try to be at the Seder. Other than that, if you want to use it, it's fine. Like at my house, I use it exclusively, but I eat the other stuff as well. As I don't use it because I feel that I can't. I happen to enjoy it. I like it. And I have so many people at my house all the time, and I use it as an opportunity to expose them to it, and they get to try it. But they don't really, but other than at the Seder, you don't really have to. It's just a good thing to do. All right, now when we get to, we did the appliances and we talked about non-food and koshering utensils. We did most of that one last week. Let's talk about preparing for the Seder. This is a very important, and I'll begin that when you're an adolescent, you always compare with all your friends as to how late your Seder went. And the later it went, the happier you are. Right? Everybody, your Seder went to 1. My Seder went to 3. My Seder went all night. Right? Everybody wants to outdo each other. But when you're not an adolescent, right, the fact that your Seder goes all night is not necessarily a plus. Right? Especially because there's certain rules that actually affect that. So one of those rules is that you're supposed to have made sure that you eat the afikomen, which is after the meal, before the middle of the night. Now, the middle of the night is not midnight. The middle of the night is from the time the night starts to the night time it ends, divided by 2. We'll have it on our bulletin what time that is. You're supposed to eat the afikomen by that time. So that's usually in the area between 12 and 1 o'clock in the morning. So if you're going to go longer than that, you're actually not being more observant, you're actually breaking that rule. Secondly, the most dangerous part of the Seder that causes you to be late is not in the Seder. It's before the Seder. It's that from the time you come home, like people come home from shul, if you go to shul, and you start the Seder, you can lose an hour with no problem at all. Just walking around the house, who's going to sit where, let's go to the table, are we ready yet? You lose an hour at that time. You're starting your Seder instead of at 9:40 at 10:40. Right? There's no way you're going to have a normal response from people. It's so late at night. So one thing that you have to do is everything that's possible to try to begin your Seder as soon as you're able to. As soon as it's the time and you're able to, you should begin it. So that means that you have to do as much preparation in advance as you can. But you don't wait for people to come home from shul to set the table. Right? It should be ready that night. So that way when people come in, they can go right to the table. If you want to put down name tags, whatever you want to make sure people just go and sit down, you do it. They should begin. The second thing that you should try to do, especially if you have a large Seder, is that there are certain parts of the Seder that are prescribed how much you have to have, right? Well, we'll go through some that aren't pertinent to this, but now the ones that's pertinent to this discussion is your matzah and moror. Matzah and moror have a certain amount you have to eat each time. If you have 20 people at your Seder, right, and you make hamotzi, and then you try to give out the 20 people the right amount, it'll take you a half hour, right? But if instead, if you prepare 20 batches of matzah, right, and then you make a motzi, and you just take a little bit from the matzah that you made the blessing on and put it in each little area, right, little pile, you can just hand them out, 1, 2, 3, and people will have it right away. The same thing with the moror, right? If you come, right, and you have the big plate of moror, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to give everyone their moror, and everyone's going to complain, and they get too much, and you start measuring it out in front of you and handing it out, it'll take 20 minutes. So measure it out in advance so that you've got already piles. Like what we do is I'll have like romaine lettuce, and we'll measure out how much each person would need, and then we put that down, and then I put a napkin down, and then I put the next one down, and then a napkin. So I've got a pile, and then all I have to do is grab the moror, right? You put it with the haroshes, and you hand it to the next one. Hand it, and you hand it. I don't have to measure it. It's done. And the napkins basically just absorb the liquid because you've washed it already, right? So that helps. Right? Those are two. If you do those three things, you measure your matzah. Remember how many times you have to eat matzah, right? You have 3 times that you eat matzah. You have the mitzvah of matzah. You have the sandwich, right? The Hillel sandwich, as we call it, and you have the afikomen. Measure those out. Measure out your moror, both for 2 times, once for the mitzvah moror, once for the sandwich. And you start on time. You will save yourself an hour and a half to 2 hours that are wasted, right? That even if you want to stay up late, and you want to take time, and you want to go through the Haggadah in depth, and everyone should talk, fine, but you're not wasting time. And you will see that people will respond much better because they're not as exhausted.
What about the food? Because it's Shabbos, it makes it a little more challenging. So food's always prepared in advance, the main meal, the Suda, but you would leave it on a blech, or if it's in the oven, which is left on, are you able to open the oven once and take out the food, and then once you close it, that's it?
No, you can take stuff out of the oven all you need. You can't put it in the oven on Shabbos, but you can take it out as much as you need.
Oh, on Shabbos you can remove it?
Yes.
So once you open the door, you can close it again, and then you open it?
Yeah, but you can't put your food back in.
You can't put food back in?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
You need multiple containers.
Well, yeah, multiple containers, take what you need.
Right, so where were we? Okay, so with the various items, so that you can save a lot of time that way. Another area that people misjudge is the wine. There's a few laws to understand for the wine. For most of the time, in order to fulfill one of the 4 cups, you need 3.3 ounces. That's a bathroom cup, right? That's that much. That's all it is. It's a little cup. It's not a soda cup. It's not a beer glass. It's a little cup. It's not a shot glass, but it's a little one. 3.3 ounces. It's like a kitchen cup. The Dixie cups are 4 ounces, just so you have an idea. That's all you have to have in order to have it. And there are a couple other laws that pertain to it. One is you are required to drink more than half the cup, right? So therefore, that you have to make sure that you drink more than half the cup, and that would be 3.3 ounces or more. The second thing is it's good to drink the entire cup. So if you buy 4-ounce cups and you use 4-ounce cups, and somebody wants to be as strict as possible, they can drink 4 ounces at each time. What you have to realize that when you're drinking wine at your Seder, very often you're drinking 6, 8, or 10 ounces in a cup, because those are normal cups. Right? And what happens is the difference between having 12, 13 ounces of it throughout the whole night, or 30 ounces. Right, and that's why people get sick. They have headaches. They get drunk. They fall asleep because they're overindulging without realizing that that's what they're doing. So you don't need to. The largest amount is for the first cup. That's 4 ounces. Because that includes kiddush, right? Kiddush and the first cup. The other cups can be less. You can have more. There's nothing wrong with it, but you have to remember that if you have more, you have to make sure you drink half the cup, right? So if you get a 16-ounce glass, you have to drink 8.1 ounces to fulfill that. But if you get let's say you get an 8-ounce glass, you drink 4 ounces, 4.1 ounces, and you're fine. Yeah.
When you say an 8-ounce glass, you mean 8 ounces of wine in the glass, or a glass that has an 8 ounce?
No, the entire size of the glass, because you're supposed to fill it. The wine glass should be filled for each cup. So if you have a 4-ounce cup, you fill it with 4 ounces, you drink the whole cup, everyone's happy, right? If you have an 8-ounce cup, right, you drink 4.1 ounces, you're fine, right? Because you drink more than half, and you drink the minimum amount. Right, so that's important to do. It's also the same idea with the matzah. Right? You have an amount that you're supposed to eat. Right? It's not an enormous amount. I don't have it here. It's because different matzahs are different sizes. But on a hand matzah, like the big hand matzahs, in general, it's less than half of one. Right? Is an example. So you don't have to go crazy with it. When it comes to the meal, no matter how many times I know how many times, no matter how many generations, the husband will tell his wife, you don't have to have a big meal, right? Everyone does. It's just how it is. You can hang it up. You might as well give up. The day you get married, forget about it. Because everybody does it. My mother did it, my grandmother did it, my wife does it, my daughter does it. It's just going to be. Even though you don't have to, you have to have, there's a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of having a meal. So you can have a meal, but you don't need 5 courses. What happens is that you overeat. You're not going to fulfill the rest of the Seder very well. You're not going to feel well. So you can keep that in mind. What will it actually do? Chances are you're never going to accomplish that one. You're going to have a lot of food, but you don't have to eat a lot of food. Right? So, and also the amount of time you spend at the meal, right, will also direct how long you spend on the rest of it. I've been to many Seders that have very long beginnings of the Seder, where every child gets to say the 4 questions, not just the youngest one, and everybody has questions and answers throughout the whole Seder. And then after there's time for the Afikomen, they rush through the whole rest, because it's 1 o'clock in the morning, right? So the idea is to pace yourself correctly, so you can do the Seder, and it'll be nicer. You fulfill it if you rush, but you're not fulfilling it as nicely. It's just an easier way of accomplishing it. It's also it's a nice thing to do, but it actually goes against what most of my rabbis taught me, which is the Seder is for your purpose of your Seder is really to teach the next generation about the going out of Egypt. And we have certain rituals that we do in order to reinforce that. But there is no requirement that every child has to say an explanation of every piece of the Haggadah. Now, even though each kid comes back from school with their own handmade Haggadah and with 100 different things that they can read, because they don't know them usually, they read them. You don't have to ask every child to do it at every time. That's not the idea, because again, it'll take you hours to get through because of it. On the other hand, you don't ignore the children. The children are the central part, but it's supposed to be interesting for them. So if your child finds it helpful that they can comment, a number of times, that's fine. But they don't have to do it every time, and you don't have to let every single child do it every time. Right? It's just like I said, when you did the 4 questions, right? It was customary that they used to have the youngest child do it. I've been to many homes; they let every child do it. Right? There's nothing wrong with these things. These are all fine, and they're things that you remember the rest of your life, and it's a wonderful experience. But if you want to make sure that you do the Seder to the best of your ability, right, you want to get through the Seder from start to finish in a way that is done nice, without rushing it, without skipping, without mumbling through it, right? And that's what these points that I'm raising with you will do. Right? It helps. Right? We all have other stuff that takes, like in my house, we always try to let everybody read. Right? If I read it, I can do it at a reasonable speed. We have people at my house, by definition, who are going to be very much novices at reading Hebrew, and they're going to take a lot longer, but that's what we do. Right? So, I'm not saying that even I listen to myself all the time, but because I have to contend with their family. But those are things to keep in mind. Right? It's not a mitzvah to make your Seder last all night. Even though it says the more you talk about the going out of Egypt, the better it is. The idea is not to make yourself sick, to do it in a reasonable way. Because if you're not eating your meal until 12 o'clock at night, right, and then you expect to go to sleep and to be able to wake up in the morning, unless you're under 20, you're not going to be able to do that without getting sick. So it's tough. It's a hard thing to do. So just a few things like that to keep in mind. What else? The karpas. I purposely put this one in here. We all have different customs, what we use for different parts of our Seder. The karpas is the loosest one. That is to say that there's very little requirement as to what you use for karpas. It's not like a lot of people use parsley, and a lot of people who don't use parsley use potato. The fact is you can use any vegetable that grows from the ground that you're allowed to use on Passover that has a blessing of Adama, meaning it grows from the ground, not from a tree. My Rabbi Torchiner told me that they use bananas and pineapple because those are two things that grow apparently on trees, but the blessing is Adama because they're really not trees according to Jewish law. And what's the reason that you eat the karpas is to cause the kids to ask questions. What kid's not going to ask you a question if you take a pineapple and you dunk it in salt water in the middle of the meal and eat it? That if you take a piece of parsley or a potato, it's probably not so strange. But a banana and put it in salt water and do it, that's going to cause them to ask. It's 100% legitimate to do that, and it's 100% legitimate to use parsley. Nothing wrong with it. Do whatever one you want, but you don't have to. You can use anything, and it's not like if I've always used parsley, I got to keep using parsley. There's no such custom. If you want to say, my parents use parsley, I'm going to use parsley, fine, do it. Nothing wrong with it. But if you want to try to include the idea of getting them to ask questions, because that's the idea here. The idea is for the children to be alert and participate. That's through asking questions. And there's also an important aspect is bribery in the Seder, right? And giving the kids candies. It talks about, in the Shulchan Aruch, it talks about giving them cracked, some type of grain that was allowed, and raisins, right? And giving that for them to eat as a treat. Like today, we get marshmallows and chocolate, right? So at my house, like if a kid says something really special, we give them something like that. And it excites them. It gives them a sugar high, but also they get happy because they win something. And that keeps them involved. Yes?
On Saturday night, the second Seder is Saturday night. What time would the Seder start?
You'll have to look at my schedule when I make it. It'll say on there. I don't remember offhand.
So when you have the Seder plate on the table and you have all the things that's supposed to be on it, you just can't put enough on that plate to feed all your guests. So I guess if the plate
it's symbolic.
It's symbolic, and then you have separate dishes which has all the.
Yes. Yeah. You don't eat from that plate. That's right.
It's strictly symbolic.
Right. So those are just a few of those ideas. The question comes up always about wine and grape juice. Right? Do I have to drink wine? Can I drink grape juice? So the answer is that wine is highly preferred, but it is not forbidden to drink grape juice, and you do fulfill the 4 cups. It's just preferred. It's preferred to use red wine, and it's preferred to use wine. But if you use white wine, it's better than grape juice, right? And not as good as red wine. Grape juice is better than anything else, other than wine. If you want to use it, you can, right? There are numerous stories about this because the law allows you really that if you don't have wine and you don't have grape juice, to use what's called the Chamar Medina. That really means the sort of like the important drink of your civilization. So, for instance, beer. Like, and when it gets down to it, like if it was a regular week, right, not Pesach, and you had a guest, would it be appropriate to serve your guest beer? Yeah, it wouldn't be below the dignity to serve someone a beer. So the beer would be an example of this type of drink. Can't use it on Passover, but that's an example. What about right? What about Pepsi? Yeah, I think I would give that to a guest. You could do that. So if you were a person who didn't, let's say you were actually allergic to grapes, you could drink Pepsi for the 4 cups, right? it would have to be something like that. You can't just choose not to use wine or grape juice. But if you should use wine if you have a problem with wine, or you've had too much wine, or you feel that you might get ill. Then you're certainly allowed to use grape juice, and you fulfill it, just as well. Other things already changes, because you shouldn't use something like Coke if you have wine and you're able to drink it. You should only use it if you don't have the wine. There's a famous story about Reb Chaim of Brisk, who a man came to him once and he wanted to know if he could use milk for the 4 cups, because he was so poor he couldn't afford wine. So it says that Reb Chaim told him, "You are," and then the man left, and he told his assistant to go get some meat and some wine and send it to that guy's house. So he says, "Well, what are you giving him meat for?" He says, "Because the guy says, 'Can I have milk for my 4 cups?' If he's having milk for his 4 cups, he clearly doesn't have meat at his Seder, because he can't have milk and meat together." So he said, "Then I want to give him meat also." But that is an example. You're allowed to do it, but you really shouldn't do it. But it's forbidden to do it if you have wine or grape juice. You shouldn't do it unless that's the case.
I know that there's certain pops you can't buy during Passover.
Right.
Which ones?
Any one that is made with corn syrup.
Corn syrup.
Right, which means that it's you have to get special ones that are marked, that are kosher for Passover, because
And
corn
Diet
syrup
Coke.
is your normal. No.
No, they have.
You have a
gotta
problem
get
with that also.
downstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot, but the regular pop has corn syrup because it's cheaper than sugar. So you can get like certain Cokes and Pepsis that they run special for Passover using sugar rather than corn syrup. And you can get it. They import it here from New York. Or you can get the kosher brands if you want. Or you can go without it for a week. Right? I keep telling my wife, I know you want people to feel at home, but I bet we could go without a week without 4 different types of potato chips. Since I don't eat them at all anyway, it's like during the year. Like for 1 week, I don't eat 4 types.
Potato chips.
That's what she buys, 4 different kinds. But it's not. I mean, the world, a lot of worse things can happen. Okay. So let's just touch on some of the laws of Yom Tov and Shabbos to conclude with, and then we'll have some questions if you'd like. So Yom Tov and Shabbos. The main difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos pertaining to what we're dealing with is in the area of cooking. On Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to. So therefore, when Passover, Seder, for instance, falls out on Shabbos, you have to have all of your food in the oven, just like on a regular Shabbos, before Shabbos begins. Then when you take it out of the oven, you can't put it back in the oven. That's it. It's done. So you have to make sure that you do it at the right time. On Yom Tov, you're allowed to take food in and out of the oven. You're allowed to cook it, right? Even though most people don't do it because it's just a lot of work to cook on the same day as your Seder, right? But you can. But you don't have to. But you are allowed to put it in and out. Your real problem with Yom Tov will lie with starting the second one, because you're not allowed to go from Shabbos to Yom Tov and to do work on Shabbos for Yom Tov, and you're not allowed to go from one day of Yom Tov to the next day by doing work on the first day for the second. So what that means is that, let's say this year, Shabbos is day 1, Sunday is day 2. Come Saturday night, right, you can't put anything in the oven until Shabbos is over, because it's Shabbos still, right? So when Shabbos is over, you can put things in the oven. That means then, hopefully everything's been cooked. So all you're doing is warming. But even that is not going to be easy, because you don't have, in general, you don't have your oven and your stove on a high heat. It's on a lower heat. And it's going to take a long time for a big thing of soup to warm up. So that's a problem, but that's how it is. There's just nothing else that you can do about
Unless
it.
you leave the burners on and don't shut them off, and put the soup on after Shabbos.
Sure, just like I said. And if you don't have it on high, it's going to take a while. So that's where your problem is going to be.
If it's not Shabbos and you have a flexible burner, are you allowed to raise it and lower it?
If it's gas.
Oh, it's gas, but electricity.
No, unless you have a special made one that you can actually decipher, when you're turning on and off the oven.
No, no, no.
Because when you turn the dial,
Yeah.
you are turning on the oven. Because it's not running.
It cycles, right?
You're making it run.
I'm saying the oven stays on continuously.
You're making it run when you turn it up.
Ah.
You see the burner turn red?
Yes.
That means you're making it run.
Okay, gotcha.
Right? You can't do that. With gas, you're just increasing the gas. That's allowed. Right? So there are certain details that we can handle.
I guess what temperature you would put food in to warm up on Saturday night when Shabbos is over would be 250?
If you have your oven at 250, then that's where you leave it at. Whatever it's at, you can't turn it up. Right? In a normal circumstance. So the real problems lie with preparing from one day to the next. You can't do that. Not on Yom Tov and not on Shabbos. So you have to wait till it's over. So literally, we will put in our bulletin what that time is on each day, so that even if it's 2 days of Yom Tov and there's no Shabbos, right, which makes it a little easier. By the time Yom Tov day 1 is over, right, you now can go and put the food in the oven. Unless you have an enormously long Seder and a few number of people, the food is not going to be warm right away. It's going to take time. So you have to keep that in mind. And you can't prepare beforehand. You have to wait until the Yom Tov is over, all right, or the Shabbos is over. That's an important aspect. There are other differences between Yom Tov and Shabbos. They're much more detailed and more specific. It's just the cooking is the largest one. That on Yom Tov you're 100% allowed to cook. So if you wanted to come home from shul and you have a burner on and everything is set, and you want to make fried matzah or you want to cook eggs, 100% allowed to do that on Yom Tov. On Shabbos you wouldn't be allowed to do that. Right? Those are our major differences between them that we have to keep in mind.
So,
yeah.
like, for instance, like, I'm going to be preparing, like Friday, I'm going to be preparing for the Friday night Seder and the Saturday night Seder. I'm going to be preparing for both of those Seders before Shabbos starts.
Good. That's exactly right. Right, so those are how the Yom Tov rules apply. Now, as far as few things at the Seder also to keep in mind, there's the law of Haseba, which means leaning. So the law of leaning applies to all adults, male and female. When you're supposed to lean when you fulfill any of the mitzvahs that pertain to freedom. So, for instance, you lean when you drink the 4 cups, because that pertains to freedom. You lean when you eat the matzah, that pertains to freedom. You do not lean when you eat the maror, because that's pertaining to slavery. That's men and women. And it's important enough to lean when you eat that if you didn't lean, you have to do it again. That shows you how significant it is. What is the idea behind it? It's really, if you remember in the old movies where they had these, like in the Roman movies, where you had these guys laying on a couch, and you had somebody feeding them grapes, right? So the way that they're laying on this couch, that's how people used to eat. They used to have a little table, and you sort of lay on this lounge chair, and you would eat on the lounge chair. And if you wanted to eat with someone else, they would have a lounge chair the opposite direction. So your heads were next to each other with a little table in between you. And that's how they would eat. That's very common throughout the world in the first century. But the people who did that were only people who were dignified people. Slaves didn't do it. Low-class people didn't do it. Only the dignified people would do that. And on Passover, because we are dignified people, we are free. So a sign of that is we lean, even though it's not a sign anymore. People don't do that anymore, but nevertheless, part of our tradition is we do it. So you're supposed to lean to your left when you eat those things, and if you don't, you're supposed to do it again, because you're not giving that feeling of that idea. That's where it comes from. Originally, it was only men who did it, but they used to say it was men and important women, and that's because civilizations back then, women did not have the rights of men. Even in Jewish civilization, we might have. They didn't where they lived. Today, there's no such thing as a woman who's important. Everybody is the same. Right? It's not like this woman's not important, this one is important. So all women have to lean just like men. They have the same rule. And it applies just as well. That's where it comes from, of bringing a pillow to the table so that you're leaning on the pillow. That's really all that it comes from. Men often wear a kittel, the white coat that they wear on Yom Kippur. We wear it on Passover. Also, some say it used to be a sign of joy because you were wearing white, but more so it's a sign of mourning. There's a relationship between that and Tisha B'Av. So people wear a white coat unless you're a mourner. Somebody within the year of mourning does not wear the white coat. Otherwise, that's pretty much an overview. Do you have any questions we should go over? Yeah.
So some food doesn't need hashgacha if it was kosher and anyhow would have been okay.
Correct.
So blue agave tequila, by government regulations, if you're labeling it that, it's only made from cactus.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing else in it but cactus. But they apparently don't have enough Jews in Mexico to bother putting it.
Well, there are some kosher for Passover. I've seen kosher Passover tequila. I saw one. It was the funniest thing because it was so incongruous. It was Death's Head tequila. Because you know how they have this Day of the Dead in Mexico, which is idol worship, right? And it's like witchcraft. And everything you can buy in Mexico has this head, the skull, right? But the only time I ever saw a skull with tequila, it had OU kosher Passover, and I saw it in lots of kosher stores in the U.S. I don't think they're imported here.
Because I wrote half a dozen distilleries that made tequila. So it would be a great marketing idea. You could sell a lot because then you have to comply with the law.
Right.
Nobody answered.
Yeah, but I would bet you now that if you go into New York to a Jewish area, you will find a number of choices of tequilas. Because here already you're finding vodkas, right, that are that way, and I'm sure that you'll start in the next few years as tequila becomes more popular, you're going to find it here as well. But I remember 5 years ago even finding one or two brands that were kosher. So if your question was, since you know by law that it's okay, does it mean that we can use it, right? So my answer is I don't know. I just don't know the fact. I can give you an example where that happened. Like Rabbi Moshe Feinstein had an example that when they asked him about Chalav Yisrael milk that has been watched, that you make sure that there's no mixture of unkosher milk in the milk. So in that case, what happens if you couldn't get it? Does it mean you couldn't use milk? So Rabbi Feinstein said no, because of the USDA, right, the laws of agriculture, that it's such a severe penalty to add anything to your cow's milk that nobody does it. And therefore you're allowed to drink regular milk if you can't get this special milk. Right? This is a general kosher law. So here he was relying on the government, right? So it could be that they would rely on it. I just don't know. I don't know if you can rely on the Mexican government. I mean, they do have a bit of a reputation. But in general, I can't say the answer. But there definitely are some, and probably over time there'll be more and more and more, and maybe even all of them eventually. Just like many like silver tequila is kosher. Right? The not the reposado or the aneo, but silver is kosher for the year of every brand, and that's because they know what's in it. It's the same idea.
Is Parvachis kosher for Passover?
He's got to say so, because it's going to have, most of them are going to have soy, and you can't eat soy.
Most of them are soy.
Any other questions?
Did you Google it? Did you ask the COR?
I didn't go to COR.
They're really
I
good
got
for
a list
emails.
of high-end tequila places, and I contacted.
Oh, but they will have already done the legwork. If you email them, they'll probably send you a list of alcohol that's kosher.
There is,
you can forward it to me.
if I remember, there's a place that I can give you that a guy, he does, his entire business is checking kosher liquor, all kinds. And he has lists of kosher liquors that people would never think to find. Like I have absinthe in my house that's kosher. I have one of them that actually has an OU on it, but that's new. But there are about 4 brands that are kosher because he goes there and he checks, and they don't change the You know, like if you would go to Johnny Walker, right, or any, maybe let's say you go to Glenlivet, right, and they're not going to change what they do very quick because it's working, right? Their whole business is based on this. So based on that, if somebody went and checked it, you can pretty well presume that it's going to be like that for 50 years. You don't have to keep checking it all the time because they're not going to change it. That was the original thing with Coke. You know, when Coke, they originally had a problem because Coke would not tell anybody what their recipe was. So they couldn't find out if it was kosher. And so you know how they did it? It's very interesting. One of the rabbis figured out, I'm going to make a list of like 30 ingredients, right? And I want you to go through your ingredients, and if all of your ingredients are in this list, right, then it's kosher. If I missed any of your ingredients, right, one or two, tell me what that is, and then we'll be able to do it. So this way, what they basically did is let's say there's 6 ingredients in Coke. They gave the guy a list of 50 things. If all 50 were kosher, then Coke is kosher, because the 6 were. That way they never told him what was in it, but specifically, but he knew what was in it. So he could tell them it was kosher. And that's how it first started back in the older times when they wanted to say it was kosher. They can do the same thing with these things, with liquor. So this guy's name is Semmel. He has an entire like a website and sends me email. I don't know how he got me. I'm not like from the big drinkers, but he found me somehow and he sends me his stuff. So I've got all lists of all these kosher liqueur and kosher liquor and gin and all kinds of stuff. All right, any other questions?
I have a question about a minchag, and I don't want to derail anybody with all these customs and stuff. But I heard somebody mention something about not having roasted meat at the Seder. Right?
That's not a minhag. There's a law that you're not allowed to have meat that could be construed as you're having the Passover sacrifice.
Right.
Passover sacrifice was rotisserie,
right,
basically, right? So the way we understand it is you're not allowed to have dry roasted meat at the Seder. The definition of non-dry roasted meat is probably what you make.
Yeah, right.
Which is you put it in a pot, you add water and potatoes, and you cook it. That's not dry roasted.
Right, okay.
That's allowed.
Straight up dry,
right.
like a dry rub, no liquid.
You're not allowed to do that at the Seder with meat. You could do it with chicken, but not with meat.
Okay.
But it's extremely rare that people do that.
Oh, you're saying with chicken, the chicken has to be cooked in the sauce?
No, chicken you can do whatever you want with.
It could be.
So eating straight part of the steak would be nuts as a brisket.
That's right.
Yeah,
you don't cook a steak on the barbecue.
Lamb, for that matter.
But you could if you're going to have a steak, right? You would never be able to have it at the Seder. You could have it on Passover. I have a whole class I prepared 2 years ago about barbecuing on Passover, and it's quite interesting all the different laws and how it pertains to it. But I know Irv Ginsburg, he buys every couple of years he buys a new barbecue for Passover.
Nice.
He doesn't want to go a week without it.
Oh yeah, when are they having the something, the pots, like for turning?
Sunday, I think it is.
Oh, it's
right? What day is it? Thursday or Sunday?
But it was Thursday.
You know?
It was last
Thursday.
Oh, last Thursday?
Yeah.
I think this Sunday is the Sheamus,
Yes.
where they take all your religious papers that you've been not throwing away, and they do that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought it was this Thursday when they're having.
Okay,
The
I guess.
kushering?
The kushering.
Was last Thursday. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought it was this Thursday.
All right, anything else? Otherwise, we'll stop here.
Question about Seamus, just quickly. Is that only text that can include the name of God in it, or is it also like any Torah stuff?
Torah. Anything with Torah.